Hello and welcome to AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. I'm your host, John S. Today we'll speak with Ed W. from the This Ungodly Hour group in Brooklyn, New York. Ed shares his experience, strength, and hope, and his ideas of what makes a WAAFT meeting and what a WAAFT meeting should be called. Good morning, Ed. How you doing?
Morning, John. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Beautiful morning in Brooklyn right now, and I'm just waking up as you know, my home group meets 11 p.m. to midnight Friday night.
Yeah, I should have thought about that when we scheduled the time for this thing.
Oh no, it's all good. I like getting up this early and doing things. So
yeah, I like the mornings, and we're actually having a perfect day here too. It looks like fall is getting ready to start for us. Anyway, right. I thought, Ed, that there's a lot I want to talk to you about. I've never talked to you before, but I get a lot of emails from you about what's going on in your group in Brooklyn. You've got this article in AA Beyond Belief that we're going to be publishing just before this podcast airs, and also just the meeting itself and your story. So if you don't mind, would you like to start just by going into your story about
what it was like, what happened, what
the standard routine? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I grew up here in New York, typical New York style family upbringing. If you've ever watched, like Everybody Loves Raymond or any of those TV shows,
yeah,
with typical New York dysfunction, and how that led to alcohol was a little bit of a long road in of itself. Growing up as a teenager, I was in it was a rite of passage for kids to get drunk at 12 at keggers in the park, and I kind of avoided that. I kind of lived a bit of a straight edge, like punk rocker lifestyle throughout high school that didn't survive college. When I got to college, that's when my drinking got bad. It was binge drinking every night. Right out, like not right out the bat, but like within the first 6 months of college, I was just a very heavy drunk. Didn't consider myself an alcoholic then. But I definitely considered myself an alcoholic way before I stepped into the rooms of AA. I drank incessantly, and then I come back to New York. I start working. I go to grad school. I'm working full time back here in the city. And I thought at that point, around age 23, 24, 25, that I had my drinking under control. And I realized now I just had it on a schedule. I'd still go out every night. I'd still get fairly wasted on weekends. I'd always have a good beer buzz, at the bar every night. But I knew to stop myself, just to have enough to wake up, go to work, and then go back and hang out at the bar that night. So was it manageable? It depends. It depends on how you look at it.
Yeah.
And this went on for years until it was actually, I know the date, St. Patty's Day 2010. I was working at a place in Midtown Manhattan. Mm-hmm. They needed us on the job, so I couldn't take off to go to the parade, the St. Patrick's Day parade that goes up Fifth Avenue every year. And so I decided to bring St. Patrick's Day to work. Went down to your one of the drugstore chains, picked up two tall boys, I believe it was Coors, and proceeded to drink that in the restroom at work. Mm-hmm. I had a good buzz going. It didn't last, it lasted as long as any, 48-ounce beer buzz would. Mm-hmm. But then I just started drinking again that night, and then I realized, I could drink at work. So I would be drinking, constantly sneaking down to drink beers at work. Beers turned into vodka. I had the kind of job where I could sit at my desk and do it drunk, sad to say. I don't think I was fooling everybody, but it was enough. It was enough to get away with it. And that got progressively worse. That's where they say in the meetings I was off to the races.
Yeah.
Because then it just turned into me waking up at 7 a.m, drinking, and drinking vodka, mixing vodka with whatever I could, coffee, tea, slushies. And when I couldn't get vodka, I would get beer. I also this is when Four Loko came out. I don't know if you're familiar with it. That was the malt liquor that was flavored like Jolly Ranchers and had caffeine in it. So it was like a Red Bull and a malt liquor.
That's one I've never heard of.
It was, and I remember that a couple years ago, the FDA actually had to took them off the shelves because you couldn't have alcohol and caffeine in one drink.
That's interesting.
Think about, the government was, I guess, for us. I personally like alcohol and caffeine. I mean, drugs are also part of my story.
Sure.
But at this point, it was mostly marijuana and a ton of alcohol. And I would do cocaine a couple of times, and I just realized this is kind of expensive and mostly boring. And if I needed to stay, if I just needed to stay up all night, I could just drink a ton of coffee. So I would do that. So I would mix caffeine with my booze just so I could go to work. Mm-hmm. So I could be drunk and go to work, but be like quote unquote alert enough to quote unquote function.
Right.
And this was bad. And then there were a lot of blackouts. There was a lot of scares. And within a year of this, I decided to try to stop and go to my first AA meeting.
Okay.
And it was a traditional meeting in my old neighborhood in Brooklyn. And I wouldn't put the meeting on blast because I've been back. It's a good meeting. But the time I went, I had no problem with the meeting itself. The speaker told a story. Everybody went around the room and shared. They didn't get around to me, but I just said this is my first AA meeting. Everybody clapped. It seemed very encouraging. Mm-hmm. And I got that whole, we'll love you too. Till you learn to love yourself vibe.
Right.
But it was, and we closed with a serenity prayer. And I didn't even have a problem with that. Mm-hmm. I'll get into my religious upbringing and thoughts on that later. But I was like, okay, I can deal with all this. It was right after the meeting when 4 or 5 guys came up to me, and that's when I discovered what I coined the Unsolicited Advice Brigade.
Yeah.
UAB.
Yeah.
That secret society in AA that likes to dictate everybody else's recovery. Right. And I'm sure they mean well.
Unsolicited Advice Brigade.
Once it has a name, then you can address it and address the problem.
Yeah.
So that's why I use it. So you never know who's a member till it's too late, because they all came up to me and they were just like, yo, you're going to go to this meeting tomorrow. You got to get a sponsor. We're going to read the big book and check. And I just I need a drink.
Yeah.
And I realized that, when you cloak the suggestions as commands to a newcomer, it's just going to be it's very off-putting. I mean, I realize now that they were trying to be very helpful, but that, that pushiness just didn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't.
So back to my drinking. I'm drinking for, my drinking patterns stay the same and they get progressively worse, where I was just, I would just wake up, typical what you hear in New York City, coffees in New York City. Like I woke up, at the end of the subway, at 4 in the morning, or, in a neighborhood I didn't know, came home. I would, my loved ones, the people I was living with, I was scaring them with my blackouts, and it was really, really bad. And also there were times when I would white knuckle it, like for holidays or special occasions. I wasn't getting to, I wouldn't get hammered. I'd actually, teetotal it for a day or two. But the minute the special occasion or any obligations were over, and it was a regular day, I'd be back to my old drinking habits, pints of vodka on end. And this culminated into New Year's Eve. I was actually at a quiet New Year's Eve at home, didn't go out, didn't drink, really actually enjoyed it. But then New Year's Day that morning, this is 2013, January 1st, 2013. I just had to run a quick errand at one of the places that were still open. So I'm walking through my neighborhood. I pass by a gas station of all places to get 2 more Coors Tall Boys to just start my day, and that quickly led to me finding whatever liquor store was open that day, and I just kind of went around, rode the trains around Brooklyn and Lower Manhattan, completely wasted, and and it was very dangerous. What I did was very dangerous because I did it in public. Mm-hmm. The crazy emotionally disturbed people that they talk about in New York. I was one of them when I drank.
Okay.
I don't remember so much, but this is what, how just loud and belligerent and obnoxious I got. So that alone was dangerous. But I did this for about 2 days. And even after the first day of waking up and realizing what I had done with a really bad hangover, and they were getting worse. I was waking up in the morning, 3 in the morning, after these benders constantly, with a really huge headache, unable to get back to sleep. It was taking a physical toll on me. Yeah. And after the second day of this, after just running around New York completely drunk, I just woke up to really I don't know what the actual what the actual symptoms or phenomena was. I don't know if it was the shakes or the DTs. I haven't looked into it.
Mm-hmm.
I just felt myself with a huge headache.
Yeah.
Feeling all the effects of a hangover. I'm still drunk.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of feel my body, starting from like the extremities of my hands and my limbs, just kind of shut down. Like everything just started going numb. And that's when I just kind of realized that if I continued this, I was dying. I had the thought, some people say they had the voice. I don't know where the voice of the thought came from, but it was just very clear that the voice said no more.
Yeah. So you went back to AA after that?
Yes, this is when I went back in. It was, I was living in a different neighborhood, like one of those neighborhoods that, maybe 5 years ago was someplace like people, they said don't step foot in, but now everybody's living here, which is happening a lot all around the city.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I walked around. I just kind of dried out for 3 days before I finally decided to find a meeting. And I looked there was one in my neighborhood, and I went there. It was a Saturday morning, like January 5th. And I walked into this church rectory, and the room was just me and two old dudes who like probably, who've been from the neighborhood or, adjoining neighborhoods, who had some time. And it was a small meeting. I guess this is a kind of neighborhood where it's a more Spanish Latin population. So like the Spanish speaking A&A meetings there were rarely packed. The English one wasn't so much. They were just happy, I guess, to have one extra guest, and I was just happy to talk to somebody. So one guy led the meeting, the other guy gave his qualification, and I shared. And it was good because I just kind of I had some time. They didn't have like 3 to 5 minutes. We had an hour and 3 people, so I was able to talk for 20 minutes, saying like, this is my second AA meeting ever. I really want to stop drinking. I don't know about making 90 minutes in 90 days or this God stuff. I just want to stop.
Right.
And instead of getting the Unsolicited Advice Brigade, and this was, mind you, these are both, traditional meetings that close with prayer. One of the guy who's chairing it, who I still talk to today, was like, just relax. Don't worry about all that stuff. All you have to do is not drink today. Can you do that? Like, sure. And it's like, I can do that. He said, don't worry about God. It's all about finding a God of your understanding, whatever that is. And I was like, cool. And I realized then I could put that part on the shelf. And then the other guy who spoke said, you want to come with me to a meeting across the way tonight? And I was like, I can't make a meeting tonight. And he was like, and instead of like giving the push, like, well, you got to make a meeting, he was like, okay, cool. But he did ask, can you make a meeting at this hospital tomorrow morning in Bed-Stuy? And I said, sure, I'll meet you tomorrow. And I went to a meeting. It was an anniversary meeting. This woman had like 27 years. It was the cafeteria. It was in the cafeteria of this hospital, and the room was packed. And it's a great Sunday morning speakers meeting. And it was kind of cool. I just kind of felt the love. I felt the caring. I didn't, and this was like definitely a church going crowd, but they weren't they would praise God and Jesus in instances, but I didn't feel like they were trying to tell everybody else how to pray or.
That's interesting though, but they would actually openly in the meeting specifically talk about.
I know there's some people who would just be like, yeah, my higher power, who I choose to call Jesus Christ.
Wow. Yeah. That was hardly ever heard when I was very first starting out. I guess that's happening more often now. Kind of weird.
And it's weird. And I can respect that when they're talking about themselves, and I don't,
Yeah, you got to give them the freedom to do it, I guess.
For you to find Jesus. But at this, what clicked for me as far as doing, this program, being part of this fellowship, was, okay, I'll make 90 meetings in 90 days. And because I realized, okay, I went to one meeting, and then I went to another one. Let me find some more in the neighborhood. Let me find some more in the city. And I realized, and what's great about a city like New York, where there's like thousands upon thousands of meetings, is you definitely get variety, and you can definitely find the groups of meetings that you vibe with and the ones that you don't, but it's worth trying them all out, especially in the beginning. God. So, and I guess but I definitely was hearing a lot of God stuff and the turning it over and these things I didn't understand. So I just like went on the Googles, and I said, okay, well, atheists in AA, and I read, I did have a copy of the big book, and I read through up to like chapter 3 or 4, whatever.
Right.
We agnostics, and I remember like the beginning of We Agnostics is like, oh, I'm, and I Bill W.
Great.
didn't believe God either. Okay, I was kind of following this, and then he just goes into, well,
Yeah.
I forget exactly, and I might be jumbling this with the 12 and 12, even though I've done the steps and read this stuff. It was like,
Right.
oh, electricity and steel and steel structures. So there must be a God. And,
Oh
and I
yeah.
was like, I don't get this. And
Yeah.
it was that and going to my first, handful of meetings that first week where I was just kind of like, I don't get this. I was raised Catholic, and long before I quit drinking, I quit Catholicism. I
Okay.
just don't have I just didn't have a firm belief in the tenets of it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely gems and good lessons you can take from Christianity, like you can from any religion. But
Sure.
that whole this really happened
Yeah.
motif that you're supposed to get into, I wasn't down with. So I don't identify as a Catholic anymore. I identify as an agnostic because I don't have a
Mm-hmm.
belief either way, and it doesn't really. I kind of take the Neil deGrasse Tyson approach that doesn't really matter
Right.
at the end, but whatever anybody wants to believe is cool with me.
Right.
So this is a weekend, I Google like atheists and AA, and the agnosticaa.nyc.org website, New York's Agnostic AA website pops up, and it's, Agnostic AA meetings in New York City. And at that time, there were like 6 or 7, one in Brooklyn,
Really?
2
Wow.
Greenwich Village.
How long ago was that, Ed?
This was 2013.
Wow, that's amazing.
So, and I remember that was even a big number because I think, 2 or 3 years before that, they had 3 or 4. I don't know. You
Yep.
get SBIC or somebody else.
Yep. That's incredible how much it's grown this last couple of years.
Someone else from New York might know the history a little better. I know it's been written upon.
Yep.
But so I go to the Thursday noon, the Agnostics at Noon group, which is Thursdays, 12 p.m. at the LGBT Center at 13th Street.
That was the very first one.
Greenwich Village, Manhattan. Yeah, and what I heard there was kind of what I needed to hear. It's very much, and I like to always say, a little aside, people that talk about the difference between agnostic or traditional AA meetings, and for me, I always say, well, agnostic meetings are traditional meetings in a lot of ways.
Yes.
For as much as, there was the Akron camp of like follow the 12 steps and find God to get sober, there was always a camp, mainly out of New York, led by Bill sometimes, saying, all you have to do is not drink and go to meetings.
That's right. And
there's hardcore people in the 12-step program will be like, oh, that's not AA. That's, I'm like, well, what are you doing here every week? You just go home and read your books. You don't have to come if this is like this whole. Right. And it was just cool. I just heard what I needed to hear about people who didn't believe in God, who necessarily didn't do the steps, but they had, years sober.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, this is my people. I like doing things my own way. I just want to stay sober. I didn't have time for this steppy BS. Yeah. So I just started finding these meetings. Brooklyn Sober Agnostics, which used to meet, they're meeting at Long Island College Hospital at the time. I made that my home group.
So, you are right. I think that, that we are kind of traditional AA.
Just back to that. Yeah. It was like, before there was a big book or a general service office or a conference, it was just Bill and Bob and a payphone and a cup of coffee. That was, right. They were just, that's how it started, and then they built this whole.
That's as basic as you can get. That was always the key ingredient, I think, of AA was the sharing of common experience.
Absolutely, and they just built this litany and liturgy around it.
Yeah,
so they replicated around the world. So, just to top off my story, so things got really, really good for me. At getting sober. I just, without getting too much into personal details outside alcoholism, definitely job life improved, my home life. So all the things that AA promised from just not drinking were coming true.
Yep.
I started doing a lot of service. I was a GSR with 90 days, even though they suggested years, and I was going to some of the meetings, and I definitely learned how to connect things by sending a lot of email.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't always the best AA. I'd also say I wasn't completely sober
Mm-hmm.
In my first year. I was still smoking pot.
Mm-hmm.
And I was open about it. And I would get different people say, well, some people said it matters. And a lot more people would say, you're not really sober.
Yeah.
I didn't care. And I got off. It just took a year for me to quit smoking
mm-hmm.
cigarettes, and then quit smoking pot.
Mm-hmm.
It's become fully clean and sober. And now in retrospect, I kind of, some things happened in my life where I just had to reassess my sobriety. And I realized, when I quit everything,
yeah,
I was smoking pot. So I marked my sobriety date as March 1st, 2014, and not January 2013. Although I say that year and a half not drinking and going to meetings and being a part of AA is still worthwhile.
Absolutely. Yep.
So fast forward. So one thing I like the Saturday meeting in Brooklyn, but for me, with my work schedule, it was, Saturday sometimes my only day off, and I would be spending the entire day, training it across Brooklyn to go to this meeting and then coming back. And I realized I just needed something at a more convenient time. And at the time, it still is the case. Most of the agnostic meetings are usually at peak AA, what I call peak AA time.
Yeah.
There are meetings at noon or at 6 p.m. when people are getting off of work.
Yep.
At least in New York, that's kind of, when most of the meetings.
Kind of around here too, 6, 7, 8.
6 or 7, people getting off of work, they want to go to a meeting and go to bed because they're no longer partying. It's understandable.
Right.
Yep. That doesn't work for all of us.
Right. Right.
I still have a night owl. I can still stay up very late. So I was looking for more of a late night meeting, and I realized after at least having a year without booze and becoming fully clean and sober, that I go ahead and try to find an agnostic, either in Lower Manhattan or Brooklyn, around later at night. So people who work with me. So and I was originally thinking, something between 8 and 10, or 9 o'clock would be perfect. And I went to Mount Carmel Church in Williamsburg, which has 30 different AA meetings or something. I'm not counting. They got the church has been very accommodating to AA. So there's groups in the morning, groups in midday, groups at night.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like the vibe there. It's definitely a younger crowd, people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, and your typical artist, hipster vibe. What you get at Williams, what you'd expect from a meeting in Williamsburg. A lot of text. And I remember going to a lot of meetings there. I've been this would be a good place. This would be a good place to start an agnostic meeting. I thought, because there was, I said a lot of young people, a lot of people with different ideas and opinions. Even though a lot of people seem very traditional, even these young people seem very traditional in AA, I realized that they'd be open to it, and the church was open to it too.
Yeah.
The problem was the schedule was full, and I realized the only slots that were really open were Friday and Saturday night around 11 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought to myself, at first, I wasn't down with it. I was like, that is really late. And I said, who would go to such a meeting at such an ungodly hour? And when the minute that came out of my head, I was like, that's it.
Yeah.
I remember just thinking I'm going to call it this ungodly hour.
Yeah.
And we're going to do it. And just having that name, and people have said it's one of the best names I've ever heard of a meeting.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely is.
Even people who are very traditional in AA, you tell them the origin behind the name, and they just love it. They're like,
So, there's actually, I think there's a need for these late night meetings. When I was very first getting sober, I went to a 10 o'clock meeting, and I also went to a midnight meeting. I mean, in the very first weeks of my sobriety, because I needed to. I mean, I absolutely had to be in meetings at the time. But the last time I answered the central office telephone, which was just last month, I guess, I had 4 or 5 people asking for midnight meetings, and we just don't have that many of them anymore. We used to, but we don't. But that's when people are kind of freaking out sometimes at night,
We have a few good ones in Manhattan. The most famous one is Midnight Group, MIG, NITE. and they have meetings from like 5 p.m. till 2 in the morning. But they started as a midnight meeting in the West Village, and that's a very interesting meeting. I always suggest people, when you're in New York, check that one out for sure.
Okay.
So I get I talked to a few people. One of the guys who spoke at this Ungodly Hour meeting decided to keep coming back because it fit into his schedule very well. And him and I basically kind of like started Ungodly Hour together because we were sometimes the only two people there for a long time. Even though we kind of follow two very big meetings. There's a really huge meeting a few blocks away, Fridays at 8 p.m. Called the Northside Group that meets in an auditorium in Williams. It's huge auditorium in Williamsburg, and most people go to that. And then there's a Friday night beginners meeting in the basement of Mount Carmel Church where we meet from 9:30 to 10:30. So most people go to that, and you just realize when the party's over, people go to sleep, and there's only a select handful of us who are still insomniacs who go up and need a meeting. So it would always be like, we started out with 6 people, and sometimes we would dip down to 3. It was never just, two of us. There would always be at least one person. So we always had you always think at least 3 people to have a real meeting, and we always had that.
Yep.
But it was it took a year before it actually finally found its sea legs. And I realized that people, I guess we'll get to this later, is like a lot of people just didn't know what an agnostic meeting was and wasn't sure AA. So it was just slow to attract people.
Yeah.
But over time, people got to know it and got to really like it. And then I think each agnostic meeting has, different flavors, and some definitely are more, especially here in New York, are very more hardcore atheists. I hate Bill W.
Oh, really?
I'm joking. I mean, I'm making a joke to illustrate. People who are very, anti-God program and vocally about it, and that's cool. I definitely respect that. Ungodly Hours is more, it's a little more in the middle. There's definitely people who are not with the program, but there's also people who are with the program because we're in a neighborhood where there's a lot of meetings, there's a lot of overlap. So, we try to be very ecumenical in our approach. We don't care what you believe or don't believe, whether or not you do the steps. And I think that's the essence of it. But, if you need a meeting, there's one here. The only thing is there's no prayer.
Right.
So to tie this with my story is I actually, after 2 years of going to AA meetings, I finally decided to get a sponsor. I had a sponsor the first time, a great guy who, was atheist, 26 years or 29 years sober. I'm not sure exactly the number, but 20 plus years sober, never did the steps, just it says he's not really part of the program. He's just part of the fellowship. He knows, knows what AA is for him. And I remember he was I asked to be my sponsor early on. He's like, "Oh, I don't know if I could help you. I've never done the steps. I don't know what I could say or do." And I'm like, "That's exactly what I want." Because I was looking for the anti-UAB. And I was also, people in the Unsolicited Advice Brigade were asking me, "Well, do you have a sponsor? Do you have a sponsor?" And I was like, okay, I guess I got to get a sponsor. So I found the most on-AA sponsor I could find first on, who's still someone I, talk to and respect. But 2 years later, I realized I didn't have to really fire my first sponsor, but I just had to start working with the guy who knew the steps. And I found someone who was wonderful, who's very he says I'm Orthodox, but I'm not dogmatic. So he's we do the steps, we read them as written, we go through all the situations, but I'm not expecting anyone to change their belief system. So I could get down with that. So I went through the journey of the 12 steps as an agnostic. And I found it helpful. I think for me, I think people say you got to do the steps or you won't get sober. Yeah. I'm more of the steps very helpful for many reasons, but I find the only thing necessary still for staying sober is not drinking and going to meetings.
That's the bottom line.
Staying
steps
sober,
are a good blueprint, though. They're like a good framework for me to operate under.
Stay sober, stay off booze, find a meeting.
Yep.
That's paramount. But so I guess getting a little bit into so Ungodly Hours taken off, and we're always, it's still a small meeting. We'll always have like 10 to 20 people, but
Damn, that's a big meeting as far as I'm concerned. We
that's
have
a big meeting,
we have like 15 to 20 at ours on a pretty regular basis. And
that's
so
a normal, most meetings are like that. Then you have like the big ones, which are more like 40, 50 people. Then in New York, ones with still, stadiums.
I got to go to one of those one of these days. I've never really been to a big, huge meeting before. We used to have a pretty big size meeting in Kansas City. Like when I was very first starting, we had a speaker meeting on Sunday that would draw maybe 100 people or so. But we just don't have many of those big meetings around here.
Yeah, I reckon when you in New York, there's a few, and I know there's like a few groups. Like I won't mention them by name because a lot of people in Agnostic AA tend to poo-poo them. I've been to those big meetings where they're very orthodox and by the book. And, some people question how they're how hardcore they are, but I really appreciate their structure and like what I call their production values because they really put on great meetings. And I'll tell people this is when you're in New York, you can go to meetings in different neighborhoods, go to different types of meetings. Go to one hardcore big book thumper meeting. Go to one agnostic.
It's kind of funny, Ed. Me and my wife, we go to New York every once in a while, and usually because she works at a museum, so we always go to like all the goddamn museums, right? Well, now all of a sudden, I'm like really interested in AA. I'm like, I'm like, okay, honey, you go to museums. I think I'm gonna go to all the AA meetings. So I'm gonna go like on an AA tour next time I go to New York. Kind of funny.
Oh, it's one.
But I find it interesting, all the different types of meetings. I'm fascinated by it.
Because even if you like, people say like, and I realize that in smaller towns, like, that meeting at the church in the middle of town is maybe like the only meeting people can go to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just feel we're very lucky here in New York, to have so many, like, if you don't like the meeting you went to, you can go, can walk down a couple of blocks and find another meeting. Yep. Really just, this is a good city to get sober in for that reason. Mm-hmm. Also, I guess the other thing I just want to talk about before we get into the note prayer in the article is just like how I found a higher power that keeps me sober. Okay. A higher power who I choose to call rarely, if ever.
Oh, okay.
That's the joke I like to use whenever call, especially the traditional meetings. Like, I'm sober with the grace of a higher power who I choose to call.
Rarely, but ever.
Never really. I never really call him.
Yeah.
Him, her, it. But what I realized, and this was actually, and now going back to like the old time, the old time traditional meetings back here in Brooklyn that I went, my neighborhood in Brooklyn I went to, where people were very church going and very traditional. I would still meet people, old timers who would say, "Oh yeah, you go to those agnostic meetings." And I remember one guy saying like, "Oh, hey, I understand. It's all about finding a higher power of your understanding," or no, he didn't say higher power. He said a God of your understanding. And for some, that's just no God at all.
Yep.
And when he said that, my head just exploded. I was just like, thank you, sir.
Yep.
Because that really, when it comes to, when you read the language of the steps, then came to believe in a power greater than ourselves, in step 2, and then God as we understand him. Well, I think if you're going to truly accept everybody, a God of everybody's understanding, for some people that is going to be no God.
Yep.
I haven't read Ernie Kurtz's books yet, and I haven't delved into that, but I will one day. Mm-hmm. And I kind of appreciate that that they put in that language, or Jim B or whoever was very adamant about, it's got to be God of our understanding if we're going to talk about this God stuff. Yeah. That was the most progressive, I think, in the late 30s.
I think so too. I think they were making an effort to temper down the Oxford group stuff a little bit. Even in places in the big book, you'll notice they'll say that if the guy you're talking to isn't very religious, don't come straight forward with all the God stuff.
That's chapter 7 and working with others. Mm-hmm. When I read that chapter at a big book meeting, so I usually go to a meeting, I find the big blue book. I usually am like, oh poo, no. But I remember I went to a meeting and I read chapter 7, and I realized that really kind of opened my eyes too. I was like, okay, cool, I can get down with this.
Yeah.
When it comes to step 2 doesn't mention God. It doesn't even mention higher power. It just says power greater than ourselves. And for me, I've just kind of said, well, that's just reality. That's just the world we live in, or the universe we live in. I think the Chinese call it the Tao, or the path. Some people will say, well, this is God's creation. I'm like, okay. I mean, but I can't see God. I don't know what it is, but I do know that the world follows certain rules. The laws of nature, the laws of
Mm-hmm.
physics. So it's if I drank, I'm most likely to go back down the path of untreated alcoholism. Just as clearly as if I jump off a ledge, I'm going to fall. I'm not gonna run like Wile E. Coyote for 6 seconds and then realize that gravity exists and then plummet.
Right.
And that also works towards powerlessness. So for me, like steps 1, 2, and 3 boil down to that old AA slogan, "Life on life's terms."
Mm-hmm.
So, and I just, so I try to carry that message. Like, people say, "Oh, God, your higher power is either, at least what the takeaway from a lot of people sharing in AA meetings, like your higher power either has to be God or this mythical concoction, or it has to be some fetish or totem, like a doorknob or a set of keys or something, And I don't definitely understand there's a need to give these things representations, but I always tell people, it's like, well, it's just all around you. It's here. It's living in reality,
right?
Instead of living in the I guess I could call the fantasy world of self-will, that no matter what I do, I will not suffer the consequences.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real essence of the steps. And I think, religious and non-religious can get behind that.
I think so.
Which is why I suggest people, and especially people I sponsored, to actually do the steps. I say, reading isn't believing. Doing this, understanding this is not going to make you a holy roller.
Right. I truly think that's the really critical about the steps, is that it's not so important about what you believe. It's really about what you do. As far as I'm concerned.
Exactly. And that's something I definitely try to work on every day to varying degrees of success. But at least when I come into a meeting, at least I have a knowledge of what the steps and what AA is.
Yeah, and I think it's good too that you have a good grounding in the big book and stuff like that. That's one thing we run into in our group. We have a lot of newcomers who've never ever been to another AA meeting. We never read the big book or anything, so a lot of them, they don't even know what a big book is. But it's good to know, because there's some good stuff in there that you can build on. There's a lot of garbage that I don't need, but it's good to know why we have our meetings, because of
This is also why, again, I didn't really get into this in the article, but I'm in the camp of I'd love if we could revise the literature, but knowing, being a GSR and knowing how AA World Services works and the voting process, it's the committee of thousands.
Yeah.
Trying to change things. So it's hardly, if you've seen the kind of pamphlets and changes we've tried to get to Grapevine or get other, so that awful spirituality pamphlet, which I thought there was actually a better, the thing is that Do You Think You're Different pamphlet from 1976 had a good atheist and agnostic story.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't understand why they just didn't cut and paste that and put that in that.
I need to read that pamphlet because I never really been big in the pamphlets, but that one.
There's some gems in there. There's gems throughout there in Grapevine. I think we have how a lot of people like to read How It Works or The Night That Promises meeting. We read what I like to call the Bill W. Awesome quote, and it's from you've seen it before. It's from the 1946 issue of the Grapevine.
Okay,
and it's just a paragraph. It's a paragraph from it, but let me see if I can remember it right now. It's like, so long as there's the slightest interest in sobriety, the most unmoral, the most antisocial, the most critical alcoholic may gather around and a few kindred spirits and announce to us a new AA group has been formed.
Mm-hmm.
Anti-God, anti-medicine, anti-our recovery program, even anti-each other.
Yeah.
Rampant individuals are still an AA group if they think so. That's the words of Bill W.
That's right.
I think he had his own issues because he would write one thing and then write the contradictory paragraph 2 pages later. That's definitely troublesome in a lot of ways. That's why I don't rely on his wisdom en masse. Sure. But I think he had some, like you said, there's some good things in that book, and then a lot of BS that you have to kind of.
He lived a long time too, really. He lived up into his 70s, which I think is a pretty good amount of time, and he was around AA for a good long time. So he really evolved. But what's so funny is people pick and choose the Bill W. that they want to say represents AA.
I guess we do it too, but I think
that's true.
I do it more as kind of not so much as a cudgel, but more just to to shine a light,
Yeah.
to like, hey, what, your Bill W didn't always think like this, and we also,
Well, we're the ones that are right at, because it's the one who's evolved that you want to.
Yeah, we're the Bill W. Yeah, we're the we're the more
We're the
evolved,
more recent version.
kind of gentler Bill W.
Yeah.
But yeah, people, like I said, but if people want hardcore Bill W, like
That's
I
fine.
more
Yeah,
power to them,
whatever.
it keeps them sober. I just think it's more when they try to, like, like I said, when they bring their program into your life, that you're just
Yeah.
like, oh, hold on a sec.
Right.
The steps were helpful. Like I definitely, and like I don't. Like, but if people say, like, I have X number of years I haven't done the steps, I don't feel placed to be like, well, you should do the steps because you're not really sober. I don't
People
know
need to
that.
relax so much about that, because those dang steps are really nothing more than writing down the experiences that we've had. And even if you don't technically, quote, do them, a lot of those things, if you really think about them, you've probably experienced anyway, just by doing the things that are necessary to not drink and go to meetings.
And I've met a lot of people who've done the steps who still display, and
Yeah.
it's human,
Yeah.
but and it's usually the more hardcore. Sometimes they're usually, are also the more pushy, and also
They're not a magic prescription. They're not like you got to do these. And unfortunately, I went to a group that kind of got that way. I started off at a really nice, gentle group when I was very first starting out, which was really nice because I needed that. But then after a while, I got to this hardcore group, and I stayed there for like 25 years.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that, and it was really brave of you to go back and kind of like should about saying goodbye. And I think that's very important too.
Yeah.
When I share, like sometimes I do it. I'll admit I do it for shock value to say it, but most of the times when I'm sharing about my belief and my approach to the steps, I say it for the newcomer or for someone who's been there for 20 years who thought they had to follow, think a certain way in AA. And I think that's why we see AA evolving today, where people realize, oh, it really is a program of suggestions. I can do it however I want, so long as I stay sober. And
yeah. I think that we are watching a shift in AA right now. We really, truly are. I think the pendulum swung a little bit too far to the back to basic hardcore people.
We spoke up, and that's the thing. And every time we speak up in a meeting, and I've gone to some meetings where it's a very traditional crowd, where I've gotten a cold response from maybe 2/3 of the room, but the other third of the room come up and are like, "Thank you for saying that.
Yeah,
that was really brave." I was like, cool. I was like, well, I don't feel so super brave or proud about it. I just learned, they talk about rigorous honesty in this program, and rigorous honesty, not pretending to believe in something
That's the thing I hear from more and more agnostics, is the hardest part about them is they say, hey, this is a program of honesty. I got to be freaking honest when I'm sharing in meetings. And that's why, they didn't feel like they were free to have that honesty. I think what I was doing, because I don't know, I honestly didn't have any freaking beliefs whatsoever, but I tried my best to believe, and I actually spoke as I believed. I guess I did the fake it till you make it thing. But unfortunately, everybody thought that I believed, I guess. And I thought, I don't know, it was weird. I was deluded. That's when I read the God delusion, I thought to myself, fuck, that's right. I was totally deluded. Totally deluded. But anyway.
That fake it till you make it slogan is the one we should burn.
Yeah, I agree. It's bad.
That's bad.
People point out though, hey, well, John, you were sober for 25 years and your life got better. I said, well, that's true. That's true.
Oh, Mazel Tov. That's good. I didn't need I didn't need all this extra stuff. I just realized I could have. I'm actually, and I feel that's one thing I feel grateful about coming into AA at a time when I think agnostic. I came in at the time when I think agnostic AA hit a tipping point.
Yeah.
So I just really grateful
That's right,
to be
you did.
here.
You did.
So
you started that meeting right around that time. Well, you started the meeting before Santa Monica.
Before Santa Monica, right when that New York Times article came out.
That's right.
And I think what happened in Toronto sparked a lot of it too. I think but it for as much as it's people are waking up to it and it's gaining more notoriety and traction, there's still so many people in AA who just don't know.
They don't.
And don't understand, which I guess goes to why I really wrote this article. Like, I think my article's not so much my drunk a lot.
Right.
Here, it was just, and it wasn't even kind of because I think I loved a lot of these stories talking about, people's journey through agnostic AA and how they had to deal with traditional AA. And I go to both. I don't, I don't, because of these meetings, I'm able to go to the mainstream people pray. And I'm like, I go along, I'll say this. I have no problem saying this for any prayer. I just don't say the first word.
Mm-hmm.
I'm lucky. You don't come across too many meetings where they run and say the Lord's Prayer, but it happens here too.
Yeah.
I used to just like leave the circle and join the other two people's hands, next to me, be like, I'm out.
Yeah.
And walk away. Now I just kind of sit there. I'll sit there silently if people want to pray that way. It's not how I pray. I think it's also a bit sectarian.
It is. It's
being, the words of Jesus.
Yeah.
Even though the Serenity Prayer was also written by a Christian monk, there's also it's a little more in line with like living life on life's terms, like a more, grant me the serenity, whatever it is, I find, whether God grants me or I find it, you're asking for the same thing, serenity, courage, and wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Our Father just sounds like, Master, pull the puppet strings. Let me know.
Yeah, it's not. I don't like it more and more, and I haven't had to say it for a while. But
it's less and less. But there's people who still say it. It's all good. And I like the me version of the Serenity Prayer. That at a regular meeting, I'm cool with it.
Yeah.
But so I guess back to the article, I just wanted to write, just kind of like because I guess going back to people saying like, what's an agnostic meeting? I don't know what they are. What do you guys do? And I'm like, it's just like any other AA meeting. We just don't pray. And then I also realized that there were just two other main criteria. One being, not every meeting does this, but I think they read a variation of the About Us that can be found on the Agnostic AA NYC website.
Right.
So
the Agnostic AA preamble.
Yeah, I don't like calling it a preamble because it causes confusion.
Right.
There's only one AA preamble, and I'm like, oh, it's a sub preamble or our mission.
Our mission statement. Yeah.
This group maintains a tradition of free expression, expressing any doubts and disbeliefs. We don't endorse any form of religion or atheism. And the last line to the best note, our mission is to assure suffering alcoholics that they can find AA.
Yeah.
Without having to accept anyone else's beliefs or deny their own. And I think that's just something, I think traditional AA can allude to that. And there's, like I said, there's meetings where you go and you can say whatever you want and it's warm and receptive, and you go and say in other meetings and no one will want to talk to you at the end. Or the worst, they'll give you the finger.
Right.
And tell you need to do X, Y. Not that finger, the pointing at
at your finger. Okay, gotcha.
Well, they might give you the other finger too. It's an AA meeting. Anything can happen. So it was just important to like have that, have some, even if it's not that verbatim. And I guess one aside is like back when we were talking about, trying to vote to change literature. Actually, I might suggest this through GS, general service channels.
Yeah.
Instead of going for revising the big book or getting our own pamphlet, I would just love it if General Service Office would take that, or General Service Conference would take that About Us card and make that like an official AA card. That if you're an agnostic, no prayer meeting, this is like officially AA. This is official. You don't know. So meetings have the option to say, hey, you can express your doubts and disbeliefs here. There's no closing prayers. And it just becomes an official, publication from AA.
I think that's a good idea. Honestly, it doesn't really matter what the General Service Conference approves, technically for what you do in your meeting, but it does kind of give you that stamp of approval. Say, see, we're official. See, they like us. We're okay. We can do this.
And it goes back. And the other thing, the other component is, we keep the big book and the 12 and 12 on the shelf. We don't poo-poo it.
Right.
I personally, when I did the steps with my second sponsor, he was suggested we do the big book in 12 and 12, and that was cool. And I suggested also reading the alternative 12 steps by Dr. Martha Cleveland at RLSG, which is a great book.
That's a really good book. It is.
Grateful to Roger and everyone in Toronto for reviving it. And we basically, in reading the 12 and 12 and the all 12 in tandem, it definitely helped me, get through it. But it also, my sponsor, who's a traditionalist, it also opened his eyes a little wider to some things. It gave him a new perspective, and he really appreciated it. And he actually said he would use it with other sponsors, traditional AA as like he kind of called it like a graduate level text, like people who's working through this text second, third time. There's some gems in as far as, because I always say it's like for me, it's like, it's not, I don't have so much a problem with the God stuff these days. I find when I read the literature, I have more of a problem with like what I like to call the Bill stuff.
Okay.
You know, the kind of I mean, I'm not going to label him schizophrenic, but that double talking, chauvinistic, 1930s, you know, put up or shut up language, I think, you know, which I think spawns like the UAB and that kind of thinking.
It does.
So there was something about the kinder, gentler approach by two women. It wrote this in the 90s to interpret the steps. And it works for any fellowship too. So I vibe with that. Even though it's not official AA, I like to, when I work with sponsees, I suggest reading that book as well. It helps.
Yep.
And then the most important component is there's just no prayer at the end.
Yeah.
We have, it's funny too, because I was talking with someone, I started another meeting at the same church. I think you got an email for that. It's what the comedy, I call it the comedy variety show.
Oh, yeah.
Do show. And it's a meeting where, you know, people can come and everybody share. There's no speaker, there's no reading. Everybody just shares for 5 minutes. And we let people tell jokes or sing a song or do whatever, or just share regularly. It's still an AA meeting if they just need to share.
Huh. That's pretty cool. I remember seeing the flyer for that. I thought that was pretty neat.
And at that meeting, because I'm doing it with some other people at other meetings, like it's not an agnostic meeting. We close with the Serenity Prayer, but when we close, people sit. We don't get up and join hands. People just say it in their seats.
Yeah, okay.
Which a lot of meetings do too. So it's cool. So it gives people the option, you know, to pray or not pray, not feel like join in. I remember someone from the Agnostic group said, well, why don't you listen to the Agnostic AA website? It's well, it's not really an agnostic group. I mean, even though it's in spirit, it is. And there's a lot of I also call meetings like Agnostic in Spirit or closeted agnostic groups in New York that you go to. And even though they pray and have the steps on the wall, people definitely speak their mind freely. There's a lot of that in New York.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who I tend to believe and have come out and said that they're just atheist or agnostic.
Yeah.
And, but they don't mind the words. And a lot of people are like that. I think we're the most stubborn of AAs.
Yeah.
And I remember my sponsor asking me, he's like, well, what do you think he asked me like just offhand, like what I think the success rate of people who go to agnostic meetings are, and people who don't do the steps or don't believe in God. And I said, I think I have no data, but I think it's pretty high from the ones the people that keep coming back are the same people I see. And I realized this, like, if you're stubborn about your beliefs, you'll be stubborn about your sobriety.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely, there's that too.
Well, we certainly have people that have found sobriety at our meeting that we're not finding it at others, and I have heard them say it's just easier for them when they feel like they're comfortable just being themselves.
Exactly, that's exactly it. And I know I have a stubborn streak in me, so I wasn't going to drink, and I wasn't going to believe in God, and so far both are working.
Your suggestion about kind of referring to our meetings as no prayer meetings.
Yeah,
I remember, Ed, that the New York Intergroup website used to have them listed, I believe, I might be wrong, used to have them listed as non-prayer meetings, but now they're using this different program, which I'm familiar with. It's a pretty cool program they use for their meetings, and they have just a drop-down. They now have it as atheist agnostic.
They have it as atheist agnostic, and I think some people are definitely happy that AA organization in New York are calling them atheist meetings as well as agnostic. I hear that a lot too, because I think that was these people would say, oh, they should call these atheist meetings because most of us are atheists, only some of us are agnostic. I mean, that's subject to debate, but I was like, what we do that I think the main, like I said, the main criteria of an agnostic no prayer meeting is no prayer.
No praying.
People we're not, even if you don't read the preamble to what we are, if you don't pray at the end, it just no matter what people believe or don't believe.
You are so right. That is absolutely the essence of it. And it makes all the difference in the world. And it doesn't matter who you are or what you believe. It's just that, hey, if you want to pray, go do that. Do it wherever you want to do it. But we don't do it here.
We don't do it here so everybody can feel comfortable.
Absolutely. It just, God, it takes so much pressure off. It makes it, I just love it. Exactly. But that is like a good way to because like it's almost like non-smoking meeting, non-prayer meeting.
And here's another argument for, agnostic AA being quote unquote more traditional than mainstream AA is that, I think, instead of reading a prayer that was written by Reinhold Niebuhr or arguably Jesus Christ, we read the responsibility statement or say live and let live. And these were all written by AA, arguably by Bill W. or people in the conference. But, everything that the things that we close with, the things that we choose to read more often than not still come from AA. It's more AA than most AA in some ways.
In our group, we don't do any kind of group recitation of any kind. And that's kind of my fault because when I left my old home group, for some reason I was like totally freaked out by the group chants and the group all that kind of stuff. It just really bugged me. So we don't do that anymore.
It can feel a little culty, I admit. And also a lot of times, like live and let live, like with the one thing about the serenity prayer is like someone says God and everybody else says God. And, there's that call and response. When everybody joined hands to say live and let live, it's kind of awkward. And some groups have voted to get rid of it because of that. But at Ungodly Hour, we have a little call and response where as everybody joins hands, the chair yells, keep it simple. And then everybody goes live and let live. So that kind of gives that kind of call and response cadence.
Yeah. And I should relax a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with a little bit of ritual, a little bit of, I
mean, the exception of passing on germs.
It's nothing.
Touch someone.
Yeah.
So some meetings have gone with that. Some meetings just close with the. Sometimes, I always say, the meetings that close completely cold, like someone reads the responsibility statement and just get up and leave. It kind of feels like that last episode of The Sopranos.
Yeah. Well, that's what we do, and we've had talks about it because that's how we close our meetings. We say, "Okay, meeting's over now. That's it."
I find the one that the Greenpoint Agnostics meeting up in Greenpoint Reformed Church Monday nights 8:15, another great agnostic meeting in Brooklyn. They just voted to do, instead of closing with holding hands and live and let live, they just basically someone reads the responsibility statement, and at the last three words, everybody joins in. I am responsible.
Yeah,
and what I like about that is there's a simplicity to it. It's just like, you don't have to memorize the entire responsibility statement when you go there. Someone's going to read it, and they say I am responsible at the beginning, and all you have to remember to say it. Everybody say it again at the end.
Yeah,
and that's, I think, for me, what agnostic, no prayer, secular AA is the simplicity of AA. It's the simplest, most basic, fundamental type of AA meeting without all this other litany and liturgy that's been built up around it. So that's why my I know a lot of people like to call it secular. I personally like agnostic for some reason. You call them agnostic meetings because of the historical context from the We Agnostics group, and that's why the We Agnostics chapter and the We Agnostics group, and that's become kind of like a term of art inside AA. But it's still confusing to a lot of people, both inside agnostic AA and in mainstream AA.
Yeah.
And so, and secular is a great academic term, but, AA is about, keeping it simple.
I think that the meetings themselves, like in meeting directories, if you want to give them what type of meeting it is, I'd say non-prayer meeting would be the best description of the meeting itself. But if you talk about, I think that we should have they have gay and lesbian AA or whatever they have. I think there needs to be something out there that has the word agnostic and atheist in it.
Because the LGBT meetings, they always say, LGBT friendly, all are welcome. And
right.
I'd love to say that these are no prayer meetings, but for purposes of WAAFT or other conferences, it's where the agnostics, atheists.
There you go. It could be agnostic, atheist friendly, maybe something like that. I don't know.
I would also be comfortable just calling it the no prayer meetings conference. For all you alcoholics, let's go to no prayer meetings. Here's your conference.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people out there, whether they believe or not believe, that just don't want to freaking pray at an AA meeting.
I know people who go to some of our meetings who have firm beliefs in God, maybe not for Catholic Christian,
right,
but who have a firm concept of a higher power, but also came into agnostic AA because of things like the Unsolicited Advice Brigade telling them what to do, or kind of feeling their program was a little stale and just wanted a fresh perspective. So that was more. I mean, that's more my thinking, an argument behind, calling this no prayer. So it's we're not limiting it to just the agnostic atheist.
Yeah. That makes sense to me.
And then it also kind of like lowers or turns the volume down a lot of the infighting about who's agnostic, atheist, or free thinking. Not that there's a lot of inside our camp, but there is some of that.
There is. We do have that, a little bit of, it's kind of crazy sometimes, but yeah, we do have that within us. It's going to be interesting. Are you going to go to Austin to the convention?
I won't be going to Austin. I got things keeping me here in New York, including my home group, and then on Friday nights, and a meeting I just helped start on Saturday night. So I made a decision not to attend, but hopefully I'll go to one of them soon, and maybe the one in hopefully there'll be one in New York or close by.
Well, I bet you anything that you'll start seeing some more regional agnostic conventions, and I think they should really do one in the New York area.
I've been a proponent of that myself, and I'd hopefully when I and some others get the time, if we could just have like a 1 day, workshop of agnostic no prayer meetings. If we ever get together and say, hey, here's have our own. Like the New York Intergroup has this thing called the Big Meeting at the New York Hilton Hotel, and it's great. It's like 3,000 people in a hotel conference.
I can't even freaking imagine that
2-hour meeting on a Sunday, and I think it's in July or June. It's usually around AA's birthday. And that's great. And for me, I mean, realistically, if we could just have a room that holds 100 to 200 people and have a 4-hour conference, meeting and conference and Q&A session about what agnostic AA is, and open it to everybody in the program or in the fellowship.
You should definitely do it.
I think it's just good to carry the message, don't drink, go to meetings, do whatever, work the steps and do whatever else you have to stay sober. If something's not working, leave it on the shelf for someone else or until it starts working for you.
Yep.
But the most important thing is don't drink and work with or talk to someone else and
don't
listen.
Drink, go to meetings, work with others.
Yeah. I'm definitely for the kinder, gentler AA. I think this is, and we're kind of all aware that this is the part of, this is the arm of AA that's growing.
Yeah.
And I hope one day, I think within years, decades time, this will evolve. There won't be any need for calling it agnostic or no prayer AA, because there'll be, most meetings I think will be just like this. There'll be more, more secular no prayer AA meetings than there will be the more traditional ones. That's just a prediction. I could be dead wrong on it.
I think you're right.
But either way, it's I'm just happy that I got to talk to you for an hour.
I'm glad too.
I drink.
Before you leave, I want to ask you about something. Did you do did you make the meeting map of the New York meetings with the Google Maps?
I did the New York meeting with the Google Maps.
That is so cool. I like that. Have you ever gone to the meeting directory at WAAFT Central? Have you ever seen that?
I've looked at it a few times.
Okay, I do that one, and I just redid it. I'm using the same damn program that the New York Intergroup uses for the meetings. Cool. It works really, really well.
I'll have to check it out.
And now we're working on there's this guy in England who's like a software programmer, and he is helping me set up a map where what you do is, like, if you don't have an agnostic AA meeting in your city, you can actually place a pin on the map, right? And then someone else will go there and say, oh, there's someone that wants to start a meeting in Kalamazoo.
That's cool. That's like the map version of Start with the Coffee Pot.
Yeah. So we're working on that. We're hoping to have that. We're getting ready to test it. But
that's great. Mm-hmm. I actually, aside from just talking about AA as a whole, I'm kind of I like what the intergroups and central offices do, and I don't think they should go away.
No,
but I would hope that over time that the listing and mapping functions of meetings become more centralized. If GSO were to take it over and say, we're not going to vet meetings, we're going to, just like Bill said, an AA meeting if you say so.
Well, this program the New York Intergroup is using, it was started by this guy. I think he's in San Jose, And it's really, really cool because what he does, all these other different intergroups are using that program, okay, that's a plug-in or whatever. You don't even have to have a WordPress site. Any site could use it, okay. Well, what it does is all of those meetings, every intergroup that uses that program, all of that data feeds into this app that this guy runs, okay?
Yeah.
So if every single intergroup in North America, or the world for that matter, used that program, all of those meetings would feed into one central app.
Which is probably a little better than my idea of having one central office run it. If it's kind of like Facebook or any other social,
yeah, you could still
network,
have
social media platform where all these different organizations are feeding into one list. That would be great.
But that is a really good format that he has, and he's updating it all the time, and he does a really good job with it. I'd like to see other intergroups do that.
Because I guess I'll close on this. A lot of people in our meetings who don't do the program or believe will always say, well, I'm not really part of the program. I'm part of the fellowship.
Yeah.
And I mean, to an extent, that's an honest statement. But I always said, the program is not just the 12 steps. We're still part of a program,
right.
A time. Like, we don't just magically appear and start a meeting, out of nowhere. It's like,
right.
We definitely have it. We get a room, we find a time, and we list it and tell people, we promote it, for lack of a better word. Mm-hmm. And that time and place is very essential it's part of the program. It's part of, just like a program for a play or any kind of social event. They'll say, oh, we're meeting here at this time.
Yep.
And that's why I keep a very extensive email list, and I shoot out whenever I get information for any AA meeting or change. I make sure to just let everybody know this is the time, this is the place.
Yep. I'm glad that you do that. I'm glad that you keep me on that list, by the way.
Oh, thanks. I'm not expecting people to show up. I just, if people are free to come or go as they please, it's AA, but at least, I want to kind of eliminate people saying, oh, I never knew about this. I'm like,
yeah.
Yeah. And I want, that's why I love the fact that the central offices and GSO are evolving on finally entering the 21st century.
Finally.
On the platform. So not just meetings, but meeting cancellations, location changes.
Yep.
Special events. It also should just go to one platform and find it all.
Yep.
And that would make things a lot easier. And I'm glad we're slowly but surely at AA's pace getting there.
Yeah. Well, your intergroup is doing a good job. I got to get the Kansas City intergroup to start using this format anyway. All right, Ed. It was good talking to you. I enjoyed
that. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Sean. It's just a pleasure to speak. And to everybody out there listening, don't drink and go to meetings.
All right.
And thanks for listening.
Thanks, Ed. Take care.
Well, that's it for another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the program. We'll be back next week with another episode featuring Coach C. Until then, you all take care and be well.